The blizzard came fast, and it came to kill. A 45-year-old Marine veteran thought he was checking an empty cabin in the Wyoming mountains, until his German shepherd slammed into the door barking like someone was dying inside. What he found wasn't a threat, but a woman in a broken wheelchair abandoned in the cold. He brought her home to survive the storm. But 3 days trapped in silence revealed something worse than the blizzard. The woman was lying. And when the truth surfaced, it didn't just break his trust, it threatened the last thing he had left. If you believe compassion can rewrite destiny, like the video, subscribe for more stories and comment where you're watching, see where this story will go. The storm did not arrive gently. It descended on the Wyoming mountains like a living thing, heavy clouds swallowing the Wind River Range as snow thickened into a blinding wall of white. Daniel Walker stood on the porch of his old wooden cabin, shoulders squared against the wind, a tall man at 45, with the hardened build of someone shaped by years of discipline rather than comfort. His dark brown hair, threaded with early gray, brushed the collar of a thick, cracked, dark brown leather jacket that had seen more winters than most men could endure. Beneath it, a red and navy flannel shirt was buttoned tight, tucked into faded jeans, rubbed pale at the knees and thighs. Heavy leather winter boots were planted firmly on the boards, and a gray wool scarf wrapped his neck pulled high against the cold. His beard was trimmed but rough, framing a face carved by loss angular cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of cold steel that rarely softened anymore. He had been a Marine once, and though the uniform was long gone, the habits remained. Silence, precision, control. People were unpredictable. Solitude was not. At his feet sat Cooper, a full-grown German shepherd, nearly 5 years old, broad-chested and powerfully built, with a thick black and tan coat, dulled slightly by age and hard living. His ears stood alert even when he rested, and his dark eyes constantly scanned the tree line. Cooper was not playful in the way younger dogs were. He carried himself with the quiet seriousness of an animal that had learned loss alongside his owner. He moved when Daniel moved, stopped when Daniel stopped, and rarely made a sound, unless it mattered. Daniel turned back inside just as the satellite phone rang its sharp electronic sound, slicing through the stillness. He hesitated before answering, jaw tightening, then picked it up. Margaret Collins's voice crackled through the static. She was 63, practical kind, and one of the few people in the region who respected Daniel's distance without taking offense. She owned several rental cabins scattered along the mountain road. Her concern was evident, edged with worry, as she explained that a young woman was supposed to be staying at one of the cabins farther up the trail. No car had been seen, no confirmation call made. With the storm coming, Margaret asked Daniel to check the place just to make sure it was secure. Daniel agreed without warmth or hesitation. He told himself it was a simple task. In and out. Then back to isolation. The drive was slow and deliberate, snow already covering the rutted road as Cooper rode rigidly in the passenger seat, nose lifted, breathing in scents Daniel could not read. When they reached the rental cabin, it appeared empty at first glance. Lights off porch, buried in fresh snow, silence pressing in. Daniel stepped out. Boots, crunching breath, fogging thick in the air. He had taken only a few steps toward the porch when Cooper exploded into motion, slamming against the truck door, barking with raw urgency. This was not a warning bark. It was panic. Cooper Daniel snapped, instincts igniting. He opened the door, and the dog bolted forward, throwing himself at the cabin door claws, scraping wood body, striking hard enough to rattle the frame. Daniel's pulse spiked. He rushed forward, scanning for tracks, for signs of danger, for anything that explained the dog's behavior. There was nothing, only falling snow and the dog's frantic cries. Daniel grabbed the doorknob. It turned easily, unlocked. Inside, the cold was immediate and brutal. The air smelled faintly of something wrong, expensive perfume clashing with frost. Daniel stepped forward cautiously, senses sharpened. Then he saw her. Sarah Mitchell sat slumped in the corner, wrapped in a thin decorative blanket, her body shaking violently in a broken wheelchair. She appeared to be in her late 20s, slender and pale, with long blonde hair tangled and damp with sweat and melting snow. Her skin was almost translucent lips, tinged blue eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. One wheel of the chair was bent inward, metal warped, making it impossible to move. She looked up at Daniel as if he were a ghost. "Please," she whispered, voice raw. "Don't hurt me." Daniel lowered his tone instinctively. "I'm not here to hurt you." Cooper slowed, circling her once, then stopping just out of reach, watching with intense focus. Sarah explained between shuddering breaths that her fiancé had abandoned her after an argument, leaving her stranded and helpless. Daniel absorbed the information quickly, already calculating the facts. No power, no heat, no supplies. She would not survive the night. The storm was worsening. There was no real choice. He lifted her without ceremony, surprised by how light she felt, and carried her through the snow while Cooper stayed close, body pressed near Daniel's leg, as if anchoring them both. The walk back to Daniel's cabin was a battle against wind and whiteout conditions, his boots finding ground through memory. Alone. Inside his cabin, warmth rushed to meet them. Daniel set Sarah carefully onto the worn sofa beside the stone fireplace and stoked the fire until flames roared. He moved efficiently, speaking little, every action measured. Sarah watched him through half-lidded eyes, noting the scars on his hands, the way grief sat heavy in his posture. Cooper lay on the hearth rug, but his attention never left her. His gaze was steady, thoughtful, not threatening something closer to judgment. Daniel tightened the gray wool scarf at his neck, standing back to assess the situation, aware of the storm hammering the walls. He felt something shift inside him, a faint, unwelcome instinct stirring. This woman had entered his refuge, his carefully controlled world carried by necessity rather than choice. Cooper's eyes reflected the firelight not with aggression, but with an unsettling depth, as if the dog sensed layers Daniel had not yet reached. Outside, the blizzard howled louder, sealing them in. Daniel's jaw clenched as the thought settled in his mind, heavy and unshakable. This would not end cleanly. Some storms did not pass without leaving scars. By morning, the storm had erased the world, sealing the cabin inside a cocoon of white, where sound, distance, and direction no longer mattered. Snow pressed against the windows in thick, shifting walls, swallowing the porch and burying the truck until only its antenna remained visible like a bent finger reaching for help. Inside the cabin existed in a state Daniel Walker understood well: survival mode. He moved with deliberate efficiency, feeding the fire, checking the shutters, rationing fuel without explanation. His posture remained rigid, shoulders squared, spine straight, as if discipline alone could hold the storm at bay. At 45, Daniel's body carried strength that had not softened with age, but his face bore the cost of restraint. The angular lines around his mouth stayed tight, his gray-blue eyes distant and guarded. He did not speak unless necessary. Words like people demanded more than he was willing to give. Sarah Mitchell sat on the sofa where he had left her the night before. In daylight, she appeared even more fragile. Tall but slender, almost willowy, her long blonde hair falling loose around her shoulders in pale, uneven strands. Her skin was fair to the point of translucence, lips still faintly blue from cold eyes, a soft hazel that reflected fear and quiet intelligence in equal measure. She wrapped the heavy wool blanket tighter around herself, trying to make her voice sound steady when she spoke. "How long do storms like this last?" Daniel answered without looking at her. "Days. Sometimes longer." That was all. He set a bowl of oatmeal on the small table beside her and turned away. Polite, distant, impenetrable. Sarah tried again later, asking about the cabin, about the mountains, about Cooper. Each attempt met the same response, short answers, clipped and factual, never unkind, but never inviting. She felt the wall immediately dense and immovable, built brick by brick over years of deliberate isolation. Yet she also sensed something else beneath it, something heavy and bruised rather than cruel. Daniel was not angry with her. He simply refused to let her close enough to matter. Cooper, however, began to matter in unexpected ways. The German Shepherd no longer remained fixed to his rug by the hearth. At first he lay a few feet closer to Sarah's chair, body stretched out, but alert head lifted whenever she shifted. His coat, thick and coarse with black saddle markings over tan, carried the faint scent of pine and wood smoke. At nearly 5 years old, Cooper was past the reckless curiosity of youth, his movements controlled, deliberate. His ears tracked every sound, but his eyes softened when they lingered on Sarah. He watched her eat, watched her sleep, and positioned himself so that his body formed a quiet barrier between her and the door whenever Daniel stepped outside to shovel or check the generator. On the second night, Sarah woke from a shallow, broken sleep, her chest tight with a loneliness she had buried too long to name. Tears came without warning, silent and hot, slipping down her temples into the pillow. She pressed her fist to her mouth, determined not to make a sound. That was when Cooper rose. His nails clicked softly on the wooden floor as he approached, cautious but certain. He stopped beside the sofa, sniffed the air, and with a low, sympathetic whine, rested his heavy head gently across her lap. The weight startled her. She froze, then slowly lowered her trembling hand to his fur. It was warm, solid, real. Her composure cracked completely. She cried, then not quietly, not carefully, but with the raw surrender of someone who had not been allowed to be weak in a very long time. Daniel returned from outside to find the scene unchanged. He stopped in the doorway, breath-fogging eyes drawn immediately to Cooper's head on Sarah's lap. The dog did not move. He did not look at Daniel. He stayed. Something in Daniel's chest tightened painfully, a sensation he had learned to ignore. Cooper had not offered that kind of trust since before the cabin had become a tomb of memory. Daniel said nothing. He set the firewood down and turned away, retreating into motion, because motion was safer than feeling. Over the next 2 days, silence became its own language. Sarah learned Daniel's routines, the rhythm of his restraint. She noticed how he paused before touching a photograph on the mantel, how his gaze softened for half a second before hardening again. She learned the sound of his boots crossing the floor at night, and the way his shoulders eased only when Cooper settled nearby. Bit by bit, fragments emerged, not through confession, but through absence. A second mug that was never used, a scarf folded carefully and never worn, a woman's name Kate etched faintly into the wood of a beam near the window, almost hidden by time. Daniel spoke of her once, not directly but enough. "We built this place together," he said, eyes fixed on the fire. "With our own hands." The sentence ended there. It did not need more. Sarah understood then that his distance was not rejection. It was preservation. The cabin was not just shelter. It was a wound he had chosen to live inside. As the storm raged on, Sarah's perception shifted. She had arrived believing she was the most broken person in the room. By the 3rd day, she knew better. Daniel was not cold. He was sealed. And Cooper, loyal to the point of pain, had found a crack before either of them noticed. On the third night, the wind howled like something alive, shaking the walls. Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Cooper's steady breathing grounding her. Daniel sat in his chair near the door rifle, resting within reach, eyes open, watchful. He did not look at her, but he was aware of her presence, of the weight she carried that was not visible. For the first time in years, the silence in his home was shared. Outside, the storm showed no mercy. Inside, something fragile had shifted. And though none of them said it aloud, all three felt the truth forming beneath the quiet whatever waited beyond the snow. The world they would return to would not be the same. The storm had softened into a suffocating stillness, snow packed high against the cabin, as if the mountain itself were holding its breath. Daniel Walker noticed the cracks long before he named them. They appeared not as a single revelation, but as small, irritating inconsistencies that lodged themselves in his awareness and refused to leave. He saw the way Sarah Mitchell shifted her weight when she reached for the mug on the table, the subtle engagement of muscles that should not have answered so easily. He noticed how her knees angled when she adjusted the blanket, how her toes pressed faintly into the floorboards for leverage. These were not dramatic movements. They were ordinary, unconscious, and that was what made them dangerous. Daniel's mind, trained by years of threat assessment and pattern recognition, began to circle them quietly. He told himself it was nothing. People adapted. Bodies compensated. But the unease remained. Sarah, for her part, felt the tension tightening around her like a wire. She was tall and slender, her movements naturally economical, her long blonde hair often pulled back now in a loose knot to keep it from falling into her eyes. Her fair skin, still pale from days without sun, flushed easily when she was nervous, and lately she was nervous often. She caught Daniel watching her more than once, his gray-blue eyes unreadable, his expression fixed in that disciplined neutrality that revealed nothing and missed nothing. She responded by becoming more careful, more deliberate, but the strain showed in the set of her jaw and the stiffness in her shoulders. She had lived her adult life performing control, but this was different. Here the audience was a man who knew silence better than lies. Cooper noticed before either of them acknowledged it aloud. The German shepherd's behavior shifted in subtle ways, his head tilting when Sarah moved, his ears flicking forward not in alarm, but in curiosity. He no longer simply guarded her. He watched her. His dark eyes tracked the alignment of her body, the way she leaned, the way she breathed. Dogs lived in truth. They did not care for explanations. They felt what was real. Cooper began to sit closer to Daniel again, positioning himself between them at times, as if recalibrating loyalties in response to new information he could sense, but not name. By the third night after the storm had broken, sleep came reluctantly to the cabin. The fire burned low, casting long shadows against the walls. Daniel sat in his chair near the door boots, planted rifle within reach, habit rather than necessity keeping him alert. Sarah lay awake on the sofa, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts a tight, spiraling knot. She waited until she was certain Daniel's breathing had slowed, until the room felt balanced on the edge of quiet. Then slowly, deliberately, she moved. The act itself was simple. She placed her hands on the arm of the sofa and pushed up, testing the weight through her legs. There was no pain, no hesitation. Her body rose smoothly, memory and muscle responding as they always had. She stood and crossed to the window, bare feet cold against the wooden floor, and rested her hand on the frame. Outside, the world was nothing but white and shadow, the snow reflecting the faint glow of the moon. For the first time in days, she breathed freely. Behind her, the floor creaked. Daniel did not speak. He stood in the doorway, tall and immovable, the faint light outlining the angles of his face and the rough line of his beard. His eyes were fixed on her legs, on the simple, undeniable fact of her standing without effort. The moment stretched brittle and exposed. Sarah turned slowly, her hand flying to her mouth, eyes wide with a fear more profound than the night she had been found in the cabin. This fear was not of dying. It was of being seen. "I can explain," she whispered. Daniel felt nothing at first. No anger, no shock, just an abrupt, disorienting emptiness, as if something essential had been pulled out of him without warning. His mind replayed every moment the way Cooper had trusted her, the nights she had cried, the ramp he had already begun to imagine building in his head to make her life easier. Kate's name surfaced, unbidden, sharp and bright, and then faded into a dull ache. He had let her into this place. He had let her touch the quiet he had protected like a wound. Sarah spoke, then words tumbling out in fragments. She was not paralyzed. She never had been. She came from money so old and vast, it functioned like gravity shaping everything around it. Her family controlled assets boards, decisions that affected thousands of lives. With wealth came surveillance expectation, and a life lived under constant evaluation. Her fiancé, Michael Reed, 35, impeccably groomed, ambitious, and accustomed to obedience, had loved her in theory, but not in practice. Michael was the kind of man who smiled easily in public and calculated relentlessly in private, his charm sharpened by a need for control. She had staged the lie to escape, to test whether anyone would see her without the shadow of power and privilege. She had not expected to be rescued by a man who carried grief like armor, or judged by a dog who answered only to truth. Daniel listened without interruption. His face remained a mask, his body utterly still. When she finished, silence reclaimed the room. Cooper shifted, glancing from Sarah to Daniel, confusion flickering through his posture. The dog sensed the fracture, but not its meaning. Daniel finally spoke, his voice flat and distant. "You lied." It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. The betrayal cut deeper than Sarah's deception alone. It reached into memory, into the image of Kate laughing on this very floor, into the trust he had placed in Cooper's instincts. Cooper had chosen her. That realization hurt more than the lie itself. Sarah nodded, tears tracking down her face. She did not approach him. She did not touch Cooper. She stood where she was exposed and small, her wealth meaningless in this room. Daniel turned away, first retreating into the familiar refuge of control. He returned to his chair and sat staring into the dying fire, the truth settling between them like a fault line. Outside, the snow continued to fall, indifferent and relentless. Inside, something had broken that could not be repaired by explanation alone. Morning arrived, stripped of drama, the storm's violence replaced by a hard blue sky and snow that lay motionless, as if the mountains were pretending nothing had happened. Daniel Walker stood on the porch, breath-steady boots planted in packed snow. The world felt too open after days of confinement. Silence stretched wide and thin. Sarah Mitchell remained inside, seated rigidly on the sofa, her posture composed, but brittle, long blonde hair pulled back, pale skin stark against the wool blanket. She had not spoken since the night the truth broke. Neither had Daniel. Between them lay an absence heavier than words. Cooper sat at Daniel's side, his thick black and tan coat bright in the sunlight, ears forward, body tense, sensing a shift he could not yet see. The sound arrived before the sight. A distant mechanical thrum cut through the stillness, low and insistent, growing louder by the second. Daniel's shoulders tightened instinctively. He scanned the sky, eyes narrowing. The helicopter crested the ridge like an intrusion, sleek and black against the blue, its rotors beating the air into submission. Snow whipped up around the clearing as it descended, a show of power that flattened the quiet Daniel valued above all else. The helicopter touched down with precise confidence. The door slid open, and a man stepped out who looked utterly out of place in the Wyoming wilderness. Michael Reed was 35 tall and lean, his movements controlled and rehearsed. He wore a tailored dark coat that did not belong to this landscape, expensive boots unsuited for snow, and gloves. He removed slowly, as if expecting an audience. His hair was perfectly styled, untouched by wind, his face clean-shaven and symmetrical features sharpened by ambition rather than hardship. Michael's eyes were cool and assessing the kind that catalogued worth and discarded what did not qualify. He was accustomed to compliance to rooms that bent when he entered. Behind him remained the pilot, a quiet man in a flight suit with mirrored sunglasses, neutral and professional, his presence functional rather than personal. Michael did not acknowledge him. Michael rarely acknowledged anyone he did not intend to use. Michael's gaze swept the cabin. The porch then settled on Daniel with open disdain. "You must be the local," he said, his voice smooth, practiced, edged with condescension. He glanced past Daniel into the cabin. "Sarah, it's time. Let's go." Sarah appeared in the doorway, then standing upright, no chair, no pretense. In daylight, her composure sharpened her features, the slender strength of her frame unmistakable. She looked smaller beside Michael, but not weaker. Her hazel eyes flicked to Daniel, once then returned to Michael. "I'm not going with you," she said quietly. Michael smiled as if indulging a child. "This is over," he replied. "You've made your point." His eyes shifted back to Daniel, dismissive. "Thank you for the hospitality. We'll take it from here." He stepped forward. Cooper moved instantly. The German shepherd surged to the edge of the porch, placing himself squarely between Michael and the steps. His body lowered, muscles coiling beneath thick fur, lips curling back just enough to reveal teeth. A deep, resonant growl rolled from his chest, vibrating through the cold air. It was not frantic. It was deliberate. Final. Michael froze. For the first time, something like uncertainty cracked his polished exterior. "Call off your dog," he snapped, irritation sharpening his voice. "Now." Daniel did not move. His hands remained loose at his sides, posture relaxed but unyielding. He said nothing. Cooper did not break eye contact with Michael, his growl deepening his stance, unwavering. Sarah stepped forward, then placing herself beside Daniel, not behind him. Her voice was steady when she spoke. "No," she said again, louder this time. "I'm done. I'm not yours to retrieve." The words carried weight, not defiance, but decision. She had spent her life surrounded by men like Michael, men who believed control was synonymous with love. Here in the aftermath of the storm, she finally saw the difference. Michael's face hardened. "You're making a mistake," he said coldly. "You don't belong here." His eyes flicked to Daniel again, dismissive. "This place, this man, this is a fantasy." Daniel felt the insult pass over him without impact. He had been called worse by men who mattered less. What mattered was the shift beside him, the way Sarah stood without trembling, the way Cooper's loyalty had chosen a side that had nothing to do with hierarchy or wealth. Sarah shook her head. "I belong to myself," she said. Michael stared at her, then laughed sharply, the sound brittle. He turned away, muttering something under his breath, and signaled to the pilot. The helicopter's engine revved, rotors biting into the air once more. Snow lifted in furious spirals as the machine rose, the noise swallowing the moment whole. When the sound finally faded, the silence that returned felt altered, thinner, fragile. Sarah exhaled slowly. She did not look at Daniel immediately. When she did, Her eyes were bright with something like grief and relief intertwined. "I'm leaving," she said. "But not with him." Daniel nodded once. He did not offer reassurance. He did not ask her to stay. She packed quietly, efficiently, movements precise, as if she needed the order to keep herself intact. Before stepping onto the porch, she placed an envelope on the table and set a small item beside Cooper's rug, a simple, well-made leather chew toy, sturdy and unassuming. She knelt briefly, touching Cooper's head once, reverently. The dog leaned into her palm, confused but gentle. "I'm sorry," she said, the words meant for both man and dog. Daniel did not answer. He stood outside, watching the horizon, scarf pulled tight, refusing to turn. Sarah walked down the path alone, boots crunching into snow, her figure receding into the vastness. Daniel did not follow. He returned inside only after the door closed behind her absence. He saw the letter on the table. He saw the gift by the rug. He did not touch either. He fed the fire. He sat down. Cooper lay at his feet, ears flicking toward the door, once then settling. The cabin returned to stillness, but it was not the same silence as before. It was heavier. And though Daniel never opened the letter, its presence lingered like an unanswered question waiting. Spring arrived slowly in the Wyoming mountains, not as warmth, but as surrender snow retreating inch by inch to reveal dark earth beneath. Daniel Walker noticed the change, the way he noticed most things now, without commentary, without relief. The days grew longer, the air less sharp, the silence less brittle. Cooper shed clumps of winter fur near the hearth, his thick black and tan coat dulling with mud and meltwater. The cabin breathed again, wood creaking as it warmed the roof, dripping steadily like a metronome marking time Daniel had not been counting. He was repairing a fence when the letter came delivered by the lone mail carrier who braved the mountain road once a week, a middle-aged man with a weathered face and few words. Daniel signed, nodded, and returned to his work, unaware that the paper folded inside his jacket carried the power to unmoor him. He read it that night at the kitchen table. The notice was formal, impersonal, printed on heavy stock, the remaining balance on the cabin, and land had been paid in full by an anonymous trust. No explanation, no signature he recognized. Daniel stared at the words until they blurred his jaw, tightening his chest, filling with a heat that had nothing to do with relief. Rage came first, sharp and instinctive. He pushed back from the table so hard the chair scraped the floor. His hands curled into fists, scars whitening across his knuckles. She had done this. Sarah Mitchell. She had reached back into his life with money, with power, with the very thing he had rejected and tried to erase his struggle, as if it were an inconvenience. He paced the cabin boots, thudding, breath harsh. Cooper watched from his rug ears angled back, sensing the storm inside his master. Daniel's pride had been one of the last intact pieces of him, hard-earned through years of service loss and survival. The cabin was not just property. It was Kate's legacy. He had bled for it, worked for it. To have it settled with a transaction felt like an insult layered on betrayal. He found the letter Sarah had left weeks earlier untouched, where she had placed it on the table. The envelope was plain, her handwriting neat but restrained, as if she had been careful not to impose even with ink. Daniel stood over it for a long time before opening it. The words inside were not an apology. They were a confession. Sarah wrote of her childhood in rooms too large to feel safe, of being watched, managed, valued for potential rather than presence. She wrote of Michael Reed's love as something conditional, measured, and of her desperation to disappear long enough to see whether anyone would care, without the weight of her name. She wrote of the cabin, of Daniel's silence, of Cooper's trust, and of Kate. She did not ask forgiveness. She explained her choice. The money was not payment. It was protection. She could not undo the lie, but she could stop the world from taking the last thing Daniel had built with the woman he loved. The rage drained slowly, leaving behind a heavy, unsettling clarity. Daniel sat down, letter trembling slightly in his hands. He saw the act for what it wasn't: ownership, but restraint. She had used her power not to claim him, but to step back. That distinction mattered more than he wanted to admit. Spring deepened. Snow vanished from the lower slopes, streams running hard and loud through the ravines. Daniel returned to routine, but the rhythm had changed. He spoke more to Cooper, brief murmurs without expectation of reply. The dog responded with small signs of renewed life, tail lifting, higher, eyes brighter. One afternoon, Daniel found the leather chew toy Sarah had left worn now with tooth marks. Cooper nudged it toward him, hopeful. Daniel did not throw it. He simply rested his hand on the dog's head, grounding them both. Sarah returned on a clear morning, her arrival unannounced. Daniel saw her truck, first an old model with mud-splattered sides, stopping at the edge of the clearing. He stood still, hammer in hand, heart steady but alert. She stepped out alone. She looked different. Not transformed, but stripped down to essentials. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a practical ponytail, her tall, slender frame dressed in simple jeans boots and a worn jacket that bore no designer mark. Her face was bare, pale skin, kissed by sun-hazel eyes, clear and unguarded. She carried no bag, no entourage, no pretense. She did not approach immediately. She waited, hands loose at her sides, respecting the space. Cooper broke first. The German shepherd froze for half a heartbeat, ears snapping forward, then surged toward her with a joy that was unmistakable and unrestrained. He barked once, sharp and bright, and collided with her leg's tail, whipping the air. Sarah laughed, a sound that startled her as much as it did Daniel, and dropped to one knee to steady herself, burying her fingers in Cooper's thick fur. He pressed into her, whining softly, forgiving without condition. Daniel watched, chest tightening with something like release. He set the hammer down. He walked to the cabin door and opened it wide. He did not speak. He did not smile. He did not explain. The gesture was simple, unadorned, final. Sarah looked up at him, eyes wet but steady. She rose, brushed dirt from her jeans, and followed him inside without question. The cabin closed around them, familiar and changed. Cooper padded between them, content tail wagging slowly. Daniel returned to the fire, adjusting it with practiced movements. Sarah stood near the table, not touching anything, waiting. Daniel did not offer forgiveness. He did not ask for it. He existed in the space they now shared, allowing the quiet to reshape itself. Outside, spring continued its work, thawing ground, softening edges, proving that some things survived, not because they were bought, but because they were endured. This story reminds us that some miracles do not arrive with thunder or light, but with quiet obedience and unseen grace. In the harshest winters of life, when trust is broken and hearts are guarded, God often works through simple acts: an open door, a loyal companion, a second chance we did not earn. Daniel did not find healing through money or power, but through truth, endurance, and a love that refused to abandon him. Just as Cooper followed his heart, we are reminded to listen when God places compassion before us, even when it feels risky. In our daily lives, may we choose honesty over fear, humility over pride, and faith over bitterness. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts, subscribe to the channel for more stories of healing and grace, and may God bless and protect every one of you who is watching.